Hi, this is Human Essence, and in today's video, I'm actually going to be doing a summary of the case of the death of Florida State University law professor Daniel Markel. If you're looking for more information about this case, I would recommend The Unveiling, which was written by Ruth Markel. So that's actually by a family member, and I think you'll get more information that's more accurate about Dan Markel than you will get from other people who might just be, doing a biography of the case, etc. So that's actually by a family member. So I recommend that as the first book to read if you're interested in this case. You can watch all of the trials, which have all been aired in Florida, and the documents are available. So the couple married in 2006. They'd met each other through JDate. They ended up moving to Tallahassee because Dan Markel got a job as a law professor at the Florida State University. He taught criminal law. Wendy was a law student at the time. She moved to Tallahassee, and when she graduated, she started to do asylum cases for human trafficking victims. Eventually, she ran a clinic at the law school, helping students do their own asylum cases, while Dan Markel was a full professor at the law school. So they were very happy at first. They had two children very quickly, one after the other. And by 2013, the marriage was over. And initially, there was a settlement agreement between the two of them. But then afterwards, there were additional motions filed to do with financial matters and to do with custody of the children. And Wendy was looking to relocate to South Florida, but that motion was denied. So what had started out as this, really good marriage with two children, they seemed to have everything, turned into, or 800 pages of court documents to do with their separation, divorce, custody, and so on. And their divorce seemed to impact all of Wendy's family, or at least four members of Wendy's family, who were extremely close in what they shared with each other. So they were, tight-knit family, so something that bothered one of them reverberated throughout the family. So Donna Adelson, we know because she wrote some emails to Wendy that became public, was really upset about the court case, and she had been providing a lot of money for the attorney. So if we move on in time, we see that in October of 2013, Charlie Adelson, who's a periodontist, meets with his then girlfriend, Catherine Magbanoa, and asks if she knows anybody who would harm Dan Markel, because his sister is so upset by the things that are going on during this litigation with Dan Markel. His mother is really upset about what's going on with the litigation, and he asked that question. Now, this is based on the testimony of Catherine Magbanoa during the trial of Charlie Adelson. But that's the third trial that happens, so there have been two other trials that have happened in the past. So from 2014 until 2023, there were three trials. So in June of 2014, two men take a ride up to Tallahassee. They rent a car, and the car happens to be identical to the car of Wendy's then boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse. But soon after renting the car, they're stopped and they get a speeding ticket and they have to return that car, and they rent a different car, a blue one. And they drive that up to Tallahassee. They follow Dan Markel for a little bit. They meet up with a gentleman by the name of Shadrach Nobles, and they do some drugs, and they get the lay of the land up in Tallahassee. And then they go back home to Miami. The next time these two drive up to Tallahassee is the day of the murder of Dan Markel. So they drive up to Tallahassee, they follow him to his gym, they follow him to his house. Sigfredo Garcia gets out of the car and shoots him, and then they go home to Miami. They get some money, they spend it on a lot of things, and that's all we hear about it until arrests are made in 2016 of Luis Rivera, Sigfredo Garcia, and a third arrest is made of Catherine Magbanua. So on the day of the murder, Wendy Adelson is up in Tallahassee. She lives in Aqua Ridge, and Dan Markel lives in Trescott. And the two of them share custody of the children 50-50. And during the summer, they pass off the children one day a week to the parent who's not having the children that week, so that they can spend more time with them, because both of these people want to spend as much time with the children as they can, and the children more or less get caught in the middle of this divorce and remain caught in the middle between Wendy's family and Dan's family to this day. It's very sad very sad that, everybody wanted these children so much that they're willing to kind of fight about them publicly often. Anyway, so that's what was happening then. So a neighbor goes over and actually sees the car driving away from Dan Markel's house. And that neighbor set off a search for the silver pine Prius that he'd seen. And they actually find the car with a lot of police work, and they're able to figure out who did this murder. But what they can't figure out is why. Soon after Dan Markel is shot, a detective Isom, finds Wendy Adelson, who's having lunch in a place called Mosaic with a few of her friends. He asks her to get in the car, and he does an interview with her, which lasts about 5 hours in the police station. Now, during much of this, she is with a victim's advocate. She's waiting to make arrangements for her children. She's making phone calls. So it's not like it's a 5-hour interview. There's a lot of, stuff going on that's not part of the interview. So when she's in the police department, she's told what has happened to her ex-husband, and she starts to speak about who might have done this, and Detective Isom asks about her day. So we find out that she had a TV repair person there for a few hours. She had an 18-minute phone call with her brother Charlie, who's in South Florida. That morning, she got messages from Dan Markel that she had been meaning to return, but didn't get a chance to return those calls to do with discussing schooling for one of her sons in the following year. And then she goes out to buy some bourbon for a stock the bar party that she's going to be going to later. She has receipts for this. So what she actually does is drive down to the street where her ex-husband, Dan Markel, had been shot, but the street is blocked. So she voices that she didn't think anything of it. She was on the phone with other people and she thought maybe there'd just been a downed tree. So she turns the car around and continues on to a liquor store that's, closer to her ex-husband's house than it was to her own, and then stops to buy crazy glue for a toy that one of her children has broken, and then eventually makes her way to this lunch when the detective comes and picks her up while she's eating a little lunch. So as she's in his office, she comes up with a number of people that she thinks could have done this, because she states that she's trying to be helpful. And she mentions that she heard the alarm go off in the house because she gets, notification when alarm goes off the night before, the day before she'd heard this alarm go off. She mentions jokes that her brother had made about it being cheaper to buy a TV than to hire a hitman, and that's why he bought the TV, that the repair person from the Geek Squad had been there that morning looking to see whether it was worth it to fix it, because it had apparently been cracked by one of her children throwing a remote at it. She wonders if perhaps the person who her ex-husband was dating had a husband who may have wanted to kill Dan Markel. She wonders if it could have been a disgruntled student. She wonders if it could have been a boyfriend she broke up with a few days ago, Jeff Lacasse. She wonders if anybody could have done this on her behalf because they thought this was somehow good. So she wonders a lot of things. She comes up with a lot of ideas, and eventually she leaves, and the investigation continues. So when Jeff Lacasse comes in a few days later, he really thinks that they should look into Charlie Adelson because he found a lot that was concerning about him. And then a friend of both Wendy and Dan Markel comes in, Tamara, and she gives a lot of insight into what she thinks on that day. So soon after, Donna and Harvey Adelson come up to Tallahassee to help Wendy, and then all of them go down to South Florida. They leave Tallahassee. Wendy indicates that she's scared to be there. So nothing much happens until they find out who is driving this Prius. They follow all kinds of cameras. They see details about the car. They can see cameras by a bank where they see them getting money from the bank on the way back. They can trace that they've actually rented this car in their own names. But there's one connection between the Adelsons and the people that they believe did the shooting of Dan Markel. Sigfredo Garcia had called Wendy Adelson's father Harvey. And so they look more deeply into all the connections, and they realize that between the Adelsons and the shooter, there is a connection. So the shooter's longtime partner and mother of his children was dating Charlie Adelson, who was Dan Markel's brother-in-law. So they're watching this, and then they also see all of the 800 pages that happened with the court litigation, and realize how very upset Wendy Adelson's family had been. In fact, they find quite shocking emails from Donna Adelson to her daughter, because Wendy gives up her phone and her computers and all of her information to the police. So eventually there is an FBI bump. The FBI approached Donna Adelson, who calls her son Charlie, who calls Catherine McBanoa, who calls Sigfredo Garcia, and few people call back the agent who did the bump, and they can just watch this go on. And all of the phone calls and all of the recordings are available to the public. So the reason that this case is so fascinating to so many people is that you can listen to all of these conversations. And since Charlie Adelson and his mother speak to each other almost every day, and you hear every detail of all the other kind of shady things they've been doing, such as selling steroids and IRS fraud and malpractice cases and all sorts of things that they're discussing very openly, as well as talking about other family matters, etc., that you can learn a lot about the family dynamics of a very unusual family. And you can also hear Charlie and Catherine McBanoa and Sigfredo Garcia. All of their calls are being monitored as well. And since Florida has sunshine laws, all of the calls are available. So a good source for that would be Fancy Fiction, who'd put those calls out with a lot of graphics. And the first person who was covering this case in detail was Minter Lawyer. And you can find his channel and watch Wendy's interview with Detective Isom and a lot of other information. So there's a lot of information out there. So that's part of the reason this case was interesting to people from the beginning. There are lots and lots of enmeshed families who actually commit murder with regard to child custody cases. It's not an unusual thing, unfortunately, but we don't always hear hours and hours and hours of people talking about, random things where you can get a real sense of who the people are. So the first trial was Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine McBanoa. He was convicted. He did not get the death penalty, which was sought, but he did get life in prison without parole. There was a hung jury with regard to Catherine McBanoa. She took the stand and she lied. Then there was a second case with regard to Catherine McBanoa in 2022, because COVID happened in between the first case in 2019 and the second case in 2022. And in the second case, she took the stand and she lied. But some of the recordings that they had of her and Charlie together in a restaurant where they went together, or a dessert place, had been clarified. So the jury was able to hear what they said clearly, and it was quite incriminating. So now we have the third trial, which happened in 2023, and this was the trial of Charlie Adelson, and he came up with a defense, and he took the stand, and within a very, very short time, the jury found him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and he was sentenced to life without parole. And then on the day that he was due to come back in court, or just like days after he was convicted, his mother was on the phone line with him and hadn't completely hung up, and was heard discussing plans to leave the country. And so she was apprehended at the airport, Miami International Airport, or maybe it was Fort Lauderdale. I'm not sure which airport she was at, but she was arrested and now is awaiting trial. So that's a summary of what's happened in this case since 2014. So I recommend you follow all the sources. Thanks for listening.